You have been cowbelled. You have been summoned. Person who just entered, can you please shut the doors? Thank you. Do you have some good open spaces? Yeah? Open, talking in a space. Hope it was a lot of fun. Hope you got some questions answered about who's using Microsoft for the DevOps and how to hire people and do good culture things. Hope it was a good time. I hope the talks were influential and helped guide your topics, and I hope we get even better topics tomorrow. Very excited. Our last speaker is from the genus Octopus parxibolus, in the vernacular known as the Pacific tree octopus, of course. A mostly amphibian species, the rare, should be on the endangered list but is not yet, of course, politics, Pacific tree octopus, is born in the water, but then migrates to the trees of our great National Pacific Northwest forests. It spends its time there, moving from tree to tree by tentacles, and then returns back to the shallows of the nearby freshwater river to mate and lay its eggs before it returns again. Its natural predators include, of course, Sasquatch. We are very lucky to have a member of this endangered race here today. Usually, Pacific tree octopuses are a bit skittish. However, I think this one will prove to be against the norm. I would very much like to introduce Holly Burton.
Hey, can you guys hear me? No, am I on yet? Okay, good, I am. That's amazing. I was not yet aware that I am a tree octopus, and fun fact, I don't go in the ocean because I'm afraid of being eaten by octopuses. So, you know, never had I realized that this would be so incredibly fitting, and I think that's the best intro I've ever gotten. So thank you very much. Amazing. Excellent work. Good job, good job. So I'm certainly not going to be able to top that, but I'll try. We're going to talk about gaslighting and gender in the workplace. It's a really warm and fuzzy topic to get us ready for the end of the day. I believe after this there will be some drinking, and that may be required, so that's great. So before I get into that too much, I'm going to try to tell you about myself. I guess I will do it from the podium. Perfect. So I'm Holly, and I'm a career coach for women in male-dominated industries. It's a really long title. Sometimes I wish it were shorter. But basically, what that means is that I work one-on-one with ambitious women who want to have amazing careers and struggle with making that happen. And I also work with companies who want to work on retaining women and struggle with making that happen. So specifically not companies that want to help more little girls get interested in coding or get more women into their companies, but companies that want to work on keeping the women that they have. So that's the work that I do. And in my past life, I was a mining engineer. I did that for 10 years. How many of you guys know anything about mining? Cool, me too. Before I got into it, it's pretty normal. So it's kind of like Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, or Zoolander, or like those giant yellow trucks that little children play with. That was my job, playing with giant yellow trucks. And that was amazing. I did that for 10 years, and it's also a very male-dominated field. It's 17% women, and that includes like all the HR people and admins and secretaries. It's probably 1 in 10 in mining engineering, which I did, and even less as you move up through the ranks. So not that different than tech. And I've worked a little bit in software as well for a mining software company, so I know your guys' world too. And the other thing you guys should know about me is I am a huge nerd about feminism. It is what I read about at night. It is what I think about all day long. If you come and talk to me about it, I will talk for far too long about it. And lucky you guys, you get to sit here and listen to me for half an hour do that. So before we get too much further, speaking of feminism, I want to give you guys a couple of disclaimers. So for starters, I'm going to be talking, broadly speaking, about roughly 50% of the population. So I am going to definitely say things that won't match with your particular experience or the experience of somebody that you know. But I'm going to speak in broad strokes, and I'll ask you guys to just sort of keep an open mind and realize that I'm speaking in generalizations. So feel free to pillory me afterwards, totally welcome, and know that I'll definitely say something you don't agree with, but it's just in the interest of speaking to a large group of people. So the thing that we're going to talk about today is fundamentally this question: am I the crazy one? How many of you guys have asked yourself this question before? Cool, a lot of you guys. I ask myself this question all the time. Other than octopuses eating me, My next biggest fear, I think, is of being that person, you know, the one person who is like raging and upset and very angry that the rest of the world doesn't understand them, or they're getting in a fight with somebody and those other people are crazy, but you know, they're the okay one, and meanwhile everybody else in the world is like, nope, it's you. You're the one that's nutty. Everyone can see it except for you. And I live in constant fear that that's me. So I'm always asking myself this question, am I the crazy one? And when we talk about gaslighting, this is really the question that'll spark us to a conversation there. So when might you ask yourself this question about being the crazy one? So you'll tend to ask yourself, or at least I will tend to ask myself this question, when I'm totally alone in a viewpoint, so when I'm the only one that thinks things should be or are a certain way, right? When no matter how many times I explain it to people, they just still don't get it. You know, I could do it through interpretive dance, I could do it, you know, through spreadsheet, I could use any communication tool in the book and still nobody gets what I'm saying. That's a big cue for me being the crazy one, right? And when the solution is completely obvious to me, but in no way obvious to anybody else. So does this sound familiar to people? Yes, big hand up over there. Good, a couple people, perfect. There's at least a few of my people here. So if this happens just once in a while to you, it doesn't really matter, right? Everybody has this. There's a lot of hands that went up earlier. It's a pretty universal human experience at some point in our lives that not everybody will get, you know, what we're saying or pick up what we're putting down, right? It's okay. It's not going to destroy any lives. But what if it happens to you all the time? Well, then you're going to start doing what I always do and asking yourself, like, oh my God, am I that crazy person? That one that thinks it's everybody else, but actually it's me? Ugh, dicey, right? So maybe that's true, right? Maybe you are the crazy one. Like maybe you just have really bad ideas, or all your viewpoints are garbage. Maybe your communication style sucks. That's what I always think it is. That's the accusation that gets kind of leveled at me. It's like, oh, Holly, you can't communicate. That's it. That's the problem, right? It could be a million other reasons. I don't know. Your mileage will vary depending on kind of who you are and what you've decided the issue is. But what if none of those things are really true? What if you guys know who you are fundamentally and you know, hold on a second, I'm not the crazy person. I'm not that bad of a communicator. I'm standing up here in front of a room full of people talking for half an hour, and I get you guys are captive and you have to sit here and listening to me, but I can't be that bad, right? Like, I don't know. I don't think that's it. So then we have to start looking for another explanation. So let's talk about gaslighting. So gaslighting is the denial of a person's lived experience such that they begin to doubt their own perception, judgment, and sanity. Fun, right? Yeah, so it's a really light thing, this like perception, judgment, and sanity, now coming into question thing. Gaslighting is pretty brutal. So if you're starting to worry that you're the crazy person and gaslighting makes you doubt your own sanity, well, maybe this is it, right? Maybe gaslighting is what's going on. So let's talk a little bit more about how gaslighting looks and how it shows up. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is the relationship between gaslighting and power, because gaslighting doesn't happen usually unless there's some sort of relationship going on with power. So it's way easier when there's some sort of power imbalance. So you'll see this between adults and children, so parent-child relationships. You'll see it between bosses and workers. You'll see it even between junior and senior employees, so not even when they report to each other, but just when there's some sort of technical mentorship or something like that going on. And you even see it in therapist-patient relationships. Does anyone here find that shocking? I found that surprising. I was like, what? Isn't that literally your job to not be mean to your clients, right? But it happens, and part of the reason that it happens in all of these relationships is because there's an advisory nature to the relationship, right? So like if you think about a parent and a child, the child relies on that parent to help them interpret the world. And it's the same thing with therapists and patients. So even though, you know, therapists aren't out there trying to be jerks to their clients, especially when it comes to really severe mental illness, there's a certain element of that client or that patient depending on their therapist to help them understand how to see the world. Fundamentally, to answer that question, like, well, am I the crazy one in this situation? How am I perceiving this? Is it correct, right? So that power dynamic has a really important effect on gaslighting because it means that there's somebody out there who you're relying on to help you. And it puts them in that position of kind of elevated authority that when they're questioning whatever you're saying, it makes you question it more yourself. right? Amazing. The other thing I want to talk to you guys about is what I call the outsider effect. This is not like an official term. Don't go Googling it. I don't think you'll find anything. I don't know what the outsider effect might be otherwise, but this is what we'll call it here. So outsiders have a different viewpoint than most people. That's what makes them outsiders, right? They might have had different lived experiences. And you'll see this on diverse teams, right? And you guys, maybe you don't read about this as much as I do. She says, humble bragging to the audience. But, you know, there's a lot of statistics, and it's just endlessly in the news that more diverse teams are more profitable, and that if you have X number of women on the board, then you'll make X more dollars, and isn't it wonderful, and shouldn't we all do this, right? And part of the reason why is because when we have diverse teams, we have a greater base of experience and ideas to draw from, and then we don't end up doing as much groupthink, right? But the problem is, we've got this outsider effect, right? So when you've got this really different viewpoint, you've had a different lived experience, there's amazing benefits to it. But then at the same time, because you're coming at the world from such a different place as everybody else, they're more apt to question you, right? And when there's a relationship where there's a power imbalance, then you might start going like, oh, hold on, how come nobody believes me? Like, no one else has lived the life I've lived, so they haven't seen the things I've seen. Therefore, they don't automatically accept what I'm saying is true. Is it true? Am I wrong? So you can see where those questions start to come in, right? So let's talk about where it shows up at work. So the first place that I always see it at work is in performance reviews. So let's think about performance reviews. Why might this show up there? Okay, so we've got our boss benevolently telling us what we've done well, what we've done poorly, how we've screwed up, whether we're okay as people. No pressure, right? So in performance reviews, it's this really perfect scenario. If you're in a relationship with your manager that is prone to gaslighting, if you're somebody who tends to interpret the world that way, like I am, always asking, am I the crazy one? It's a perfect scenario to help you do it, because they're literally there telling you how good you are at your job or at your life or at the task that you're assigned to do, right? It's a perfect time for you to ask yourself, like, hold on, that's not how I see it. Maybe I'm crazy, right? The other time you'll see it is when proposing ideas. It's a great time to look for that outsider effect. If you're proposing an idea that's way outside of the mainstream, that most people haven't thought about before, or that comes with reasoning that most people don't think about, then that's another time that you'll start to see these effects. And then the last time that I think, well, maybe not the last time you guys will see it, you'll probably see it lots after we have this conversation, but one other key place for you guys to look is in interpersonal conflicts, right? So we all get in little fights every once in a while at work, tiffs here and there, and you'll start to see gaslighting show up in interpersonal conflicts, because sometimes when people really want to win a fight, we'll resort to kind of unfortunate, not name calling, but unfortunate accusations like, oh, well, there's no merit in what you're saying, I couldn't possibly understand that doesn't make any sense where you're coming from, and those sorts of words really cause somebody to question their own experience. Make sense? Perfect. So a little bit more on gaslighting. One thing that you guys have to know about gaslighting is that repetition is really important. You guys will not be like these massive gaslighting victims if this happens to you one time in your life, right? One time does not gaslighting make. It has to be sort of systemic, and it has to happen over time. And most people aren't awful, right? Like, how many of you guys go to work regularly and are like, oh, I can't wait to gaslight some people today. I'm just going to destroy some worldviews. Anybody? No? Okay. 2 people. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this. I didn't want to be the only manipulative monster in the room. So this has to happen consistently, repeatedly, and yet nobody sets out to do it, except for us, right? So like, most of the gaslighting clearly is coming from this corner, but other than that, like, how is this happening exactly? It's a bit bizarre, right? So here's the thing about the repetition. The repetition doesn't have to be happening right now. It doesn't just have to be perpetrated by us two. It could have been perpetrated by people in the past. So for people that have a history with this type of abuse, and I want to be clear, I use the word abuse intentionally because gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. People who have a history of this are more prone to feeling or being pre-programmed to reach for this "am I crazy" explanation, right? So sometimes that history can come from parents and relatives. It can also come from romantic partners. And you'll see this a lot, you know, I think it's very common in families that have a history of addiction, right? So families with alcoholism or drug addiction or gambling or something like that, which is all three of those things are really common. I think most of us in this room, if we don't have that in our family, at least know somebody who does, right? So you'll start to see people preconditioned to gaslighting from exposure to those types of relationships and environments from a young age, which is really sad, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of tragic. And you'll also see it in traditionally marginalized groups, so groups who traditionally haven't had a voice in society or whose viewpoints haven't been as important. That's another place where people will become exposed to it early. Perfect. So speaking of traditionally marginalized, let's talk about women. So for gaslighting and gender, there's a bit of a power dynamic that goes on between women and men. How many of you guys are familiar with that power dynamic? Okay, a couple, great. How many of you guys think it's great? Oh, dicey question. Okay, we won't ask. Yeah, so historically, there's been a massive relationship between men and women in power. Things are different today than they were in the 70s or the early 1900s, but historically, men have really held the cards in society, right? Women are becoming more and more powerful by the day, but not that long ago, certainly within my grandmother's lifetime, women couldn't even vote. Women didn't have control of household finances. We didn't have the ability to get divorced. I don't know if you guys remember, like back in Mad Men, Betty Draper having to ask for a divorce, and then Donald Draper granting that, and her risking losing custody over the children as a result. So not that long ago, right? Like, how old is Mad Men? Like, 50 years, something like that. Like, really not that long ago, and things have changed a lot. But and those relics, even though they're more than a lifetime ago for me, are still present in today's society, right? They're still there in how my grandmother raised my mother and how my mother raised me, and they're still there in how we show up in our workplace, right? The other thing that I'll mention is that historically, women's opinions and voices have been given less value. So statistically speaking, well, maybe not statistically, because I'm not going to tell you the stats on this, I don't have them top of mind, but generally speaking, if I were a dude up here, with my manly voice telling you these stats, you'd actually think I had a little more credibility, which is really interesting. And for a long time, because societal power sat in male hands for so long, we've been really conditioned over many, many years to look to men as decision makers, right? And to pay attention to what men are saying. And it totally makes sense, right? What we all want to do in a room to feel safe is pay attention to the person that has the most power, the person who can most influence our lives and our outcomes and our personal safety and our personal happiness and our paychecks and things like that, right? So you can think about that in terms of who has been in charge politically for many years, even back to kings, and even currently there's, I think, 5 female heads of state or something like that, like very, very, very tiny amounts, right? And so even as a society, we're working towards having women's voices more valued, men's have still got a ton more power. Does that make sense? And the last piece I want to talk about with gender are some specific female-coded behaviors. So specifically, I want to talk about caretaking and peacekeeping. So when we're looking at gaslighting, there's the person doing the gaslighting, right? And then there's the person on the receiving end of it, right? The person asking the question, like, oh, maybe I'm crazy, right? So there's a way that they interact with the gaslighter that makes that easier, and makes it easier for that to take hold. And 2 things that enable it are caretaking and peacekeeping. So women from an early age are taught that we should take care of people's emotions. So I don't remember if I did this today, but typically when I get up on stage, I'll be like, how are you guys? Is your day going okay? Are you getting tired? Are you ready for the end of the day? And that's emotional caretaking, right? And peacekeeping is when I will kind of sublimate my own needs or my own opinions to keep the peace, right? So it's a less powerful position. It creates some amazing things in society in terms of less conflict, but fundamentally doesn't elevate me to the same level of power. So you get that same old power dynamic playing out. So with all of that in mind, let's talk about what happens when gaslighting transpires. What's the end result? So some emotional effects, beautiful as they are, include self-doubt. So you'll doubt your perception, intelligence, and even your worth. I don't know about you guys, but that's a big ouch moment for me. Oops. There we go. That's a big ouch moment for me. That idea of doubting your own worth is really painful. You might experience shame. And I don't know how many of you guys, anybody here read Brené Brown? Couple? Yeah, okay, perfect. So those of you who do, this won't be news to you, but for everybody else, she makes a great distinction between shame and guilt. So guilt is feeling badly about something that you've done, and shame is feeling badly about something that you are. And when we talk about gaslighting, we're fundamentally talking about shame, feeling badly about who you are. Another thing you'll see is depression, and for no big surprise, right? If you look at the rest of the things on this list, like if I felt these ways, I'd probably get depressed too. Totally makes sense. And the last thing, which I think a lot of people find surprising, and I certainly did, is that you become more dependent on your gaslighter. Does anyone here find that odd? Yeah, weird, right? You're like, I think I'd want to get as far away from them as possible. They seem like jerks, right? But it's really interesting because it kind of creates a feedback loop. Right? So you start out going like, oh, I'm not sure I can perceive the world correctly. And your gaslighter's like, yep, right on target. You definitely can't. Don't trust yourself, not even a little. And you're like, God, that person seems smart. Maybe I should run everything past them. Maybe I need them to understand if I can really correctly perceive the world. So it creates this endless loop where you have to keep going back to them to help you be safe and sane and happy. So what does that look like in the workplace? So what you'll see in the workplace is that your ideas are not worth fighting for. So if you're someone that's being gaslit, you'll probably start to feel that way, right? Because there's this huge emotional cost to it. You go up there, you're like, hey, I've got this great idea. And they're like, no, you don't. Your idea sucks. And also you do too. And you're like, oh, I'm not doing that again. No idea was really worth that. That was painful, right? So you'll stop fighting for your ideas. You'll find it incredibly exhausting. This is a very, very tiring process. You'll probably silence a lot of your viewpoints and opinions for the same reasons that we talked about with ideas. It just becomes frustrating and exhausting to keep having to defend who you are as a person, not what you've done, but who you are, right? Going back to that root of shame. You probably won't take on high-profile projects. And why would you? Because when you do, you just expose yourself to more of this same dynamic, right? And you likely will both not put yourself up for promotions and raises, but probably be less likely to be considered because you haven't been taking on high-profile projects, you haven't been having cool ideas, you haven't been voicing your opinions. So it's kind of this negative loop. Yikes. How are we doing, guys? Some emotional caretaking moment here, like lighten the mood a little. Are we glad we picked this for our last topic of the day? I am. Yeah, so these are some pretty brutal effects and not the kind of thing that I would want for myself as a human being, not the kind of thing I would want for myself as a worker, not the kind of thing I would want as a manager for my workers. And yet they show up. So what I've wanted to do today is really give you guys a good view into what gaslighting looks like and how it shows up and where you might look for it and what enables it. And I've given you guys a bit of a view into how it shows up in a gendered way. And I want to leave you guys with a statistic that I think is really illustrative of this showing up at work. So 50% of women in STEM will leave their jobs within the first 12 years. I don't know about you guys, but like this stat blows my mind. 50%. I think I counted earlier. I think there's like about 30 women here, just like half of us. Peace out. We're gone. This is a massive, massive number. And I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the talk how I don't do work with companies around getting girls interested in coding or getting more women in the door of my company. I really do work around retention, and here's why. This is crazy how much money this costs companies, and how much mental health this costs the 50% of women who bail. I'm one of those 50% of women, by the way. Remember that thing about me being a mining engineer for 10 years? Here I am, right here in this stat, right? This happens for a variety of reasons. And I believe that one of those reasons is this gaslighting dynamic that we've talked about today. So what I really hope for you guys is that you can take some of this information and notice where it shows up at your work. When I work with my coaching clients in that capacity around change, people always sort of think that the first step to change is action. Actually, the first step to change is noticing. So your homework for you guys today, arrogantly, I'm going to give you all homework. Your homework is to notice, where does this show up in your life? Where does this show up at work? When are you doing it? I, by the way, am a huge gaslighter. I do it to my boyfriend all the time. It's you guys, all of us, we're all monsters. It's true. You thought it was only us two, but it's everybody in this room. But yeah, I gaslight my boyfriend all the time, and it in kind of a fun, jokey way. I'll tickle him. He'll say that tickles, and I'll go, it doesn't tickle. And that's madness, right? Like, it's convenient and it's adorable and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's gaslighting too. So I want you guys, for your homework, to go out and notice where this shows up in your life. And that's it. So if you guys want to talk a little bit more about gaslighting, it's such a fun topic, I know. Then you guys can get in touch with me. There's all my contact info. I'm also going to be around the conference the next couple of days. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions.
Oh, we have time for questions.
Okay, we've got time for questions.
Just please repeat them for the recording.
I will
Round of applause. Thanks, yeah, it's the end of the day and I have a microphone, so like we can do some questions for sure. Does anyone have any questions for Holly?
What percentage of the 50% is attributed to gaslighting? The 50% of the women leaving, is there any statistics?
Yeah, I don't have it broken out. So the question is a great question. It is what percentage of that 50% of women who leave is attributed to gaslighting? And as an engineer and stats nerd myself, love the question and also don't have the answer. So the particular study which that is pulled from didn't look at the reasons why women left. There's a lot of other studies that do, none that I'm aware of that specifically pinpoint gaslighting. And one thing that you'll see when you read studies about why women leave is, depending on the study, a lot of them tend to clump around like left to have family as a reason. Really basic studies will kind of leave that intact. Better studies will start to tease out what that really means and looks like. And invariably, when you take that clump apart, that group of women who like left for family reasons, what that looks like is couldn't get promoted, didn't feel included, sexual harassment, different things like that. And so in my knowledge, there's not a lot of studies that look at gaslighting as a specific reason. And also, I don't think that that means that it's not there. I just think it means it's not a hot topic of conversation. Does that make sense? Cool. There was one back there, I think, first.
So you mentioned caretaking and peacekeeping as traditionally female attributes. They're often used to discredit people. On the flip side, I've noticed that women tend to get penalized more heavily for not having these attributes. So, like, what would be your thoughts on how, if doing it kind of hurts you and not doing it, like, ostracizes you, like, what do you do?
Right. So, yeah, to summarize that question, like, help, women are totally effed, what do we do? And I'll expand on that a little. So basically she said, like, cool, so women are socialized to be emotional caretakers, and also we get smacked down for emotional caretaking, and help, now what, right? Because I can see how it's getting in my way, and I can see how it's absolutely essential, because if I don't do it, nobody likes me, and God knows we can't be unlikable, just ask Hillary. And I have a whole business card about that, but anyways. But like, what are we meant to do as women? And this is, I could talk at length about this, so I'll kind of summarize it into a small answer, and happy to discuss more with anybody that wants to. There are kind of two schools of thought when it comes to working around working issues with women at work, right? The first, which I'll badly term fix the woman approach, and the second, which is fix the system. So the fix the woman approach kind of typically is like, oh, let's train them, let's help them have better career skills, let's help them be more leaderly, aka more like a traditional man's leadership model, right? And then there's the fix the system approach, which is like, nope, ladies, you guys stay exactly the way you are. We need you that way because of diversity reasons and so on. And we'll make it easier for you to exist in the system as it is. And I think with regards to your question about like, well, what do women do? like all questions when it comes to women in the workforce, you really have to work on both sides of that equation. So there needs to be not only awareness on the side of the system, i.e. people who are not those women, around what's going on, and actually active work towards changing it, not just awareness. So that's a piece. And then from the side which you can actually do something about, because that's really, hoping for other people to change is a fool's mission anyways, right? It's got to be a really personal decision. It would be really easy for me to stand up here and kind of give you advice, like, well, I think you should do X, and I think you should be strong about this and soft about this. And it's fundamentally not what I want to do as a professional. I think that society really likes to advise women on how we should be, right? So women have to be really sexy, except if we're feminists, then we're not allowed to be sexy, right? Or we're bad feminists, or we're bad women. And you have to decide what's going to be comfortable for you. So there's a certain amount of emotional caretaking that I do that I did in this talk. And I do that because I like to be a warm person. And I like how the room reacts to me when I do it. And there's also times that I choose not to. And the goal for me, really, especially when working with clients, is having people step out of coming at that from a place of instinct and automatic and moving into a place of choice and tool. Does that make sense? A very long answer, hopefully covers it in some way. Yeah? Oh my God, it's such a good question. So the question, which I'll summarize, is how to navigate the difference between gaslighting and actual feedback. And then what was the second part to that?
And just like, do you have any advice for communication around that?
Around when people are gaslighting you?
Both. How do you handle the gaslighting? How do you handle the feedback? How do you navigate all of this? That's a big question.
Yeah, big question. Okay, so yeah, I have the memory of a gnat. Let's see how this goes. So how to tell the difference between gaslighting and actual feedback. So if it's about your personality, I don't know if it's gaslighting, but it's certainly not actionable feedback or very nice. So that's one thing I'd say up front. And I'll preface that by saying that women as a group, especially in performance reviews, tend to have their personalities reviewed rather than their performance, which is very painful to anybody that's experienced it. I know I have literally been told I have a crap personality and that I need to fix it. So that's always a great thing to hear from a manager. So, that's a piece. I think you also have to consider kind of the source, how well they know you, and where they're coming from, and whether you hear that from other places. In the workplace, we tend to think of it as if your manager says you have to work something, then you have to work on it. And actually, as human beings, we all have the choice about what we want to work on, right? We can choose. Like, my manager can say, like, Holly, you have terrible communication style. And I can go, cool story, bro. And also, I'm not working on it. That may have effects on my employment, and certainly I'll want to message that in a more delicate way than, thanks, cool story, bro. Sorry, I keep laughing into the microphone. But it really is actually your choice about whether you want to work on it. And so part of the homework that I think is there for everybody, anytime you're getting feedback, it doesn't matter who you are, is to check it against outside sources. Like, does this actually make sense? And if you hear it from all kinds of different people, and especially if you hear it from people that you really trust, people that you trust, that you would sort of hand your beating heart to and be like, please don't squash this thing, I need it. Those people, if they're going to say it to you, it's probably more accurate. If you don't have a lot of people in your life like that, there are lots of people, for example, the people who they want to trust with their squishy beating hearts are kind of gaslighting them too. Then what I really recommend actually is, finding yourself a mentor, find yourself like a therapist. Somebody who can be impartial and who can help you pull those pieces apart, because they can get really thorny if you're somebody who tends to reach for gaslighting, or not for gaslighting as an explanation, but for that am I crazy thing, and I'm one of those, right? So not really a perfect, clear flowchart there, but that's sort of where I'd start you on that. And then the second question that you asked was around how do I navigate each of those? And what I'll do in the interest of time is I'll take that offline with you, because I could talk forever about that. And actually, I have a couple things that I'll commit to sending out tweets about later, some specific slides around if you are being gaslit, what are 3 steps that you can take to deal with that, kind of 3 levels of escalation. And if you're a manager and you notice gaslighting on your team, what you can do around that. I'll tweet those out later so you guys can keep your eyes out for that too.
2 questions. One, what's your Twitter handle? I can see it down at the bottom there, but
Here. Yeah, it's not. There's a lot of Holly Burtons. Can you see it better on this one?
Yes, HMKJ Burton.
That's it. I have like 15 middle names, guys. Thanks, family. And there's other Holly Burtons in the world. There's like Holly Burton Farms, and there's some Holly Burton who's a singer in the UK, and then there's me. So I use this usually on the internet. Yeah.
My second question was about feedback versus gaslighting from the other perspective.
Yeah.
By giving somebody feedback, like how can I check in with myself or with them, or how do I know if I'm
Gaslighting somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to pull it back to, yeah, sorry. So the question is, how do I know if I'm gaslighting somebody as a manager? I'm just going to pull up this slide, right? So gaslighting, right? What is it? So denial of somebody's lived experience so that they're going to doubt their perception, judgment, and sanity. So it's not necessarily true that if you, for example, in performance feedback, if you give somebody performance feedback and they disagree with it, that doesn't make you a gaslighter. It just makes you somebody with a difference of opinion on somebody's performance or something like that, right? What turns that into gaslighting is if you say, you know, hey, so-and-so, I think you need to work on your octopus references because they make people uncomfortable because they're really afraid of octopuses or something, you know, whatever it is, right? Also, I'm not uncomfortable. I want to make that clear.
I've gotten that feedback, so.
Perfect.
It's not gaslighting.
Great. It's not gaslighting because she's checked with people she trusts. And, oh, the laughs about gaslighting. Anyways, so if I say that to you, and in fact your response was different, like, oh, hey, that's really interesting, actually, because most people love my octopus jokes, and they make very few people uncomfortable, Holly. So thank you. I get where the feedback is coming from, and also I'm not really sure that that's something I want to systematically work on about myself as a person, being overly reliant on octopus metaphors. Right? So if that's the response, she goes, no, actually, it doesn't match my lived experience. And then here's where the gaslighting comes in. When you start to go, well, tough, you're wrong, you have to work on this, how could you not have realized, right? And when you start sort of shaming them and blaming them for not seeing it your way and insisting that your way is the way, it's kind of really the difference between like acting like a nice human being to somebody and acting like an overly entitled weirdo about their own personhood, right? Yeah.
One more question.
Okay, one more. Who wants it? Can I see? Okay.
Yeah, so I actually never heard of this term until probably about 6 months ago, and I'm just wondering like where the phenomena, I guess, was first defined or how
Yeah.
it originated. 'Cause I don't like why it's called gaslighting.
It's a good story. I'll do my best to tell us. So the question was, I've only just heard of this. Where did this originate? How can we call it gaslighting? And you know, let me say that I believe that this has originated at the beginning of time with human beings. I think it's just something we do to each other as a species that isn't very nice. Sometimes purposefully in a very manipulative and evil fashion, and other times innocuously, like I tell myself I do to my boyfriend every time I tickle him, right? And where the term came from, though, it's a very, very old black and white movie. I don't know from what year. Perhaps you seem to know the story. Maybe you do. Yeah, 30s or 40s, and it's a movie called Gaslight. And I haven't seen it, so I'll do my best to describe what I learned on Wikipedia about it. But anyway, so in the movie, it's like, I think this con man, I believe he's from France, he marries this like very wealthy woman, and she has got some sort of family jewels or heirlooms that are stored either in the attic or the basement of her house, I'm unclear. And unbeknownst to her, he goes rummaging through said attic or basement on the nightly, trying to find this valuable artifact, whatever it is. And he brings a gaslight with him to do it, and they have gaslighting in their home. And she talks to him and she says like, oh, the gas lights were flickering last night. And he's like, no, that's all in your head. The gas lights aren't flickering. I think you imagined it. You know, and then meanwhile, next night he goes and digs some more and she can hear these noises and the gas lights are flickering again. And she goes, oh, I hear these noises. It's like there's somebody in the attic or in the basement or whatever. And he goes, no, you know, I think you're just imagining it. That's not really happening. And slowly she begins to go crazy. And I believe some other things happen near the end of the movie. I'm not going to spoil it, she says, pretending she knows the ending. But anyway, so that's where it comes from. It's kind of this perfect little example of gaslighting in him quite nefariously trying to steal her fortune and then telling her that she's nuts to cover it up. Yeah? Cool.
All right, can we get a round of applause for Holly? Thank you so much. I thought that was a great topic to end with, but then again, I am a business goth, so no topic is too dreary. Few announcements to close out our first day. First, I'm going to go to tomorrow morning. Now, I know we have an event tonight, and some people like to just like roll on in on, you know, like a lowrider on the second day, but you're not going to want to do that because tomorrow, between 7 and 7:30, we are going to have donuts delivered. That's right. They're going to be cocoa donuts, not Blue Star. I know people like Blue Star. Cocoa donuts, for those of you who are not familiar with Portland, is another Portland staple, and they do just like really good traditional, classic, old-fashioned donuts. The important thing is it's not voodoo. Yeah. So those are being delivered in addition to the gluten-free ones that we had today. There is also optional lean coffee happening tomorrow morning at 7:30 in B117. Because the coffee will not show up at that time yet, it will be bring your own hot beverage of choice. But if you'd like to participate in lean coffee, that will also be tomorrow morning at 7:30. Now I want to talk to you about tonight, the after party. So, as I mentioned this morning, the evening event is at OMSI, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. It is just down the river. It's south of here along the river. There are multiple ways to get there. You can take the MAX Yellow Line, which is our train system. You can take the streetcar A-Loop, which is another sadder train system. It's newer, but it's like, so if you're like outside and you're like, oh, is this the Max or the streetcar heading towards me? If it's making this like high-pitched whine, and you're just like, is something broken? That's the streetcar. It will, oddly enough, get you there faster. And there's also a bus 6. Something to note, however, is that while our public transportation is pretty dang good, frankly, for America, it is pretty dang good in 90-degree weather, and they actually, some things are slower now because the trains get overheated. So Max is taking longer, and I guess there's a small power outage where we are that's affecting the streetcar line. Just check Google, and you'll just, if you're taking public transportation, you're going to want to do it a bit earlier to get down to OMSI in time for the party starting at 7. You can also drive, you can take a lift, you can walk, but it is about a half hour if you want to do that, probably not in this heat. But you are going to want to come. Because, again, we are in Turbine Hall. First of all, it has air conditioning. Just want to put that out there. There will be alcoholic beverages. You each get 2 drink tickets at the door. After that, it's a cash. There will be non-alcoholic beverages with no limit on those. Yeah, there will... woo! Free water! Thanks, Portland! The thing you're not known for at all. There will be appetizers, and there will be light desserts, and there will be vegan and gluten-free options of both. In fact, the head caterer that put together the menu is vegan and gluten-free herself, so it'll be tasty, but you know, being helpful to those people with those dietary restrictions. In terms of the amount of food, we're supposed to have 5 bites per person. So, depending on how your appetite is, if you have more of like a legacy monolith appetite, as opposed to, say, microservices, you might want to grab a bite to eat on the way. There are restaurants around here. Portland's known for its food. You might want to get out of this direct area because it's a lot of more chain restaurants, but along the way in the southeast are some pretty good restaurants if you want to grab a bite to eat before showing up to the event. Doors open at 7. There will be fun and activities. Robot Arms and our event sponsors, Atmosera and Puppet, are both holding huge raffles for gigantic drones. I know at least one has a camera on it. So that sounds pretty cool to me, and I'm very excited to see you there. Again, doors open at 7. It's free parking. Bring your badges so you can get in, and I will see you all there. So awesome. I'll see you there tonight, and I'll see you here tomorrow morning. Bye.